Now, China, the world's biggest source of planet-warming gases, has announced its first ever concrete target to cut carbon emissions. President Xi Jinping said greenhouse gases would be reduced by 7 to 10% by 2035, and that all parts of the economy would shift away from fossil fuels. Until now, China's actions on climate change had focused on boosting renewables, things like planting trees, wind and solar power. Let's bring in Henna Hundal, who is a delegate to the UN Climate Change Conference. Henna, hello to you. Is this a target that delegates were pleased with, or did it disappoint?
Well, it's great to be back with you, Sally. Thank you for having me again. And, I think this is a moment for the world to watch. This is a paradigm shift. I was there in Scotland in 2021 at the UN Climate Change Conference. The whole convention was very enthused about passing a resolution to phase out coal. And in the 11th hour, we saw China and India voice disagreement, and that resolution was softened from the language phase out coal to phase down coal. And now we're seeing almost a 180-degree reversal, at least in the messaging. Let's put aside the motivations, intentions, and actually executing on these actions, but at least in the messaging that we're seeing from some nations like China relative to sort of what's happening in the United States, where a lot of climate action efforts are being rolled back. So I think certainly this is a start. We should encourage more countries to make these sorts of pledges. And I think we really have to go from there. But this is certainly a moment to watch in terms of this rapid paradigm shift we're seeing and who's really going to be the leader in the clean energy revolution of the future.
And it's great news, isn't it, that China is putting itself out there to show that it's a leader in this area, because it is the world's biggest source of greenhouse gases. And that is no surprise, given the scale of China, the number of people who live there, the enormous industrial manufacturing base that is in China. It's no surprise that their emissions are huge. But when it comes to their targets they've set, so far they've met them, haven't they? And they are showing a real commitment to this.
I think it's really important to be clear. China is no sort of climate steward. We don't have to really sanitize the record when we look at it being a top oil importer, a top coal producer. So there's a lot there in terms of areas that need to be targeted for improvement. But what we are seeing is the Chinese government invest hundreds of billions of dollars in clean energy projects, in renewable technologies, really seeing this as the area for them to harness and really showcase that leadership posture on climate action. So I think we have to commend what we can commend and also call out where there could be improvement. And I certainly welcome, any country really making these types of pledges, especially in a moment like now, where it can be very easy to see a permission structure to undo some of the climate work that's been done. So I think we need to encourage this type of approach and really keep an eye to make sure that it's actually implemented.
And what about other countries? For example, they all had to sort of try and present their plans, didn't they? What did the US say?
Well, the U.S. is sort of par for the course with President Donald Trump, who has not really been one to favor climate action. We know, of course, when he came back in his first day in office, he issued a series of executive actions, one of them being to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. And, we've sort of seen him really try to roll back without hesitation, without trepidation, without second thought, a lot of the actions that, for example, President Biden had initiated to help move the United States along in this clean energy revolution of the future. And so I think that that's really worrisome in terms of the steps back that we're taking here in the U.S. I think, it does really remain to be seen who will lead in that vacuum, in that leadership vacuum. As I mentioned at multiple COP conferences that I was at back when John Kerry was President Biden's climate envoy, you really saw the United States set the tone on climate matters. And so it sort of waits to be determined who will really, fully take on that role. But certainly we see some hopeful progress in terms of countries like China making these pledges, and I think more other countries should follow suit.
Henna, thank you. Always good to get your take on what's going on with climate. See you again soon. Henna Hundal there.